Another thing that you can do in order to get a feel for the financial stability of your potential supplier. This is relatively new, and I only learned of it about 18 months ago. There are a few companies. One is GloBiz, and they have a network of accountants, and they can do the accounting due diligence. So you can find out who is the owner of the supplier that you're dealing with, maybe some information about their financial stability and their customer base. And the best part about this service, it costs a few $100s, and they can usually do it in a matter of days. So I use that a lot. Another common pitfall is the use of a translator. Because the translator or interpreter is such an important person in expressing your thoughts to the supplier during the negotiation, it's very important you get a professional interpreter. So often the foreign buyer will show up at the hotel, come down to the lobby, get an interpreter, and that interpreter might not know about the product, let alone your negotiating tactics. So if you have to use an interpreter from a hotel or something like that, simply sit down with them, go over, maybe pick the 50 technical terms that you use so that they understand your plan and the vocab that you'll use. You want to make sure they're up to speed before you go into the negotiation because they are such a key point. Another little trick that you can employ, that we do this quite often, is we have a number of Americans at our company that speak Chinese, and we'll still bring the interpreters with us, sit down at the negotiation, and not let anyone know we understand what's going on in the local language. And then right when we're starting to talk about price, I'll excuse the interpreter to go to the restroom or something, and I'll just sit there and make notes and keep my ears open. And you would be surprised at how many times the opposite side of the negotiating table has mentioned, oh, our markup's about 10%, or I think we can come get 5% more, 5% less. So it's a little bit of a trick, but it works. Also, don't let that happen to you. You would be surprised at how many people on the other side of the table really do understand English, and they might not be expressing it. So now we've talked about how do you negotiate the purchase order. Let's move into some more substantive matters, such as how do you ensure the quality control. Unfortunately, what often causes a lot of stress, especially for new to China sourcing programs, is that basically the purchase order is the beginning of the vendor coordination process, not the end. It's very rare that a purchase order is placed and then 3 months later, without a lot of discussions, it magically shows up at your warehouse back home. So there is a lot of hand-holding, and you should be prepared for it. During the pre-production phase, we like to say educate rather than dictate. What I mean by this is a lot of, especially professional manufacturers or purchasing managers in the US and Europe will come to China with a very clear list of demands. What does this Chinese factory have to do in order to be a qualified vendor? They must have certain technology or a certain quality control process in accordance with ISO. That's very basic, but if you get too specific, it might compromise the relationship because in the West, production is based on technology and capital intensive. In China, obviously, it's labor intensive. So you must educate on what are the goals in terms of the quality points that you're trying to achieve and work together to perhaps alter the methods that allow you to reach that same quality. For example, maybe back home, if you're doing some metal stamping, you would have a $200,000 progressive die, and the product is made in a couple hits of your heavy equipment. In China, they might have 10 or 15 metal stamping stations, so the production methods and the quality control methods are radically different. The goal is to have a part that's to spec, so you need to focus on that goal and work with the supplier to find ways that they can achieve your specifications. Another headache that often happens in the mainland is, especially during initial purchase orders, that if the local side runs into a problem, often they're hesitant to call you up on the phone and ask for your suggestions on how to fix it. You tend not to hear about the problems until the last minute because the suppliers are scared you might cancel the order if they have problems. So from day one, I think it's very important to sit down with your suppliers and explain that you're there to build a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship, and if there are any problems, please contact the buy side early on so that you could work together to fix them. So it's best to deal in an open fashion based on trust and transparency. Unfortunately, that means that your sourcing program really needs to be a company-wide initiative on the buy side. It's very rare that one purchasing manager can control all the aspects of China purchasing, from logistics to quality control to the day-to-day vendor coordination. So you might have to pull together a team of experts on the buy side that can field and answer questions from the supply side. So make it a company-wide initiative. However, the point of our presentation today is how can you assure quality on a limited budget? So let's talk about some of the solutions that don't cost a lot of money that will allow you to have better quality assurance in the mainland. First, a lot of people don't realize that most of the major testing labs are already in China. So you can get your UL certification, or for example, if you need to do some type of chemical testing, it can be done here in South China rather than shipping it, FedExing it back and forth to the West in China. And it's generally less expensive here. Second, there are plenty of quality assurance auditors, from the guy that's a freelancer to very professional companies like SGS and others, that all they do is provide quality assurance. As a ballpark figure, most quality assurance auditors charge about $450 US per day plus travel expenses. So to have an independent auditor go to the factory during a key point such as containerization before it ships out is very affordable and certainly pays dividends. A very effective tactic that doesn't cost any money is to make it very clear to the supplier that you would like to see their internal quality assurance data and testing data included with your shipping documentation. So when the container goes out, they should send you in advance their internal testing. You would assume that they're doing it, but this kind of forces everyone to be honest and to provide that data for you. And if you see there's fluctuations in their internal documentation, it might be a red flag that there are going to be issues in the future. So the key is to have your quality assurance done on the China side. A lot of smaller companies tend to tie in quality control with the terms of trade. For example, if you have the negotiation structured so that the product is delivered to your warehouse in the West and you can have a chance to look at it before making that final payment, certainly you're not as exposed. The problem is if you wait until the product arrives in, for example, America or Europe, and then you find some problems, you're going to have to negotiate with any sorting cost. How do you get the product back to China for rework? Most importantly, you've compromised your lead times to your customers. So by spending a little bit of time and energy up front on assuring the quality before the product leaves China, you're going to avoid a lot of headaches down the road. So now let's talk about what is probably the hardest obstacle to overcome, and that's how do you avoid having your suppliers become competitors, and this is a very hot topic. First, I really want to say that this is not a unique problem to China. Knockoff artists are prevalent all around the world. And what I've found is that generally it's a push rather than pull strategy. It's somewhat rare that a Chinese factory is going to just pick up your product by random and then try to develop a marketing strategy to sell it in your home market. However, it is very common that your competitors back in the US or Europe like your product, they'll take it to China and ask a factory to knock it off. So generally it's a push rather than pull strategy. There are some simple things that you can do to protect yourself, but you need to do them early on in the process. For example, I encourage all of our customers to register certainly their brand names, trademarks, patents, logos during the RFQ phase. So even before production starts, as soon as you're thinking about handing over your samples to China, you want to make sure that you're protected. Luckily, China is a first to register rather than first to market system. That means even if you're doing business in China, someone else can register your brand name and then they're on the top of the hill and it's very hard to knock them off. Luckily, the cost of registration are maybe a few thousand US dollars, and it's a very straightforward process. So I suggest getting it done even during the request for quotation phase. Second, when you're gathering quotes in China, you can spread it around. What I mean by this is during the RFQ phase, if you have multiple components in a finished good, break it up so that you're having the suppliers quote on the components rather than the full product. That way they don't see the big picture. Also, it's fairly easy to whitewash branding from your product, from the packaging, even the blueprints. So be sensitive in the beginning. A very powerful way to avoid knockoffs is to build a firewall, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But basically, it's employing a third party to do your packaging in China for you.